host of Wonders Without Number. In each episode, we talk about breaking discoveries in science, which reveal that our Creator, the God of the Bible, has left a pattern of His fingerprints throughout the universe. Check out our other resources at davidrives.com. Sign up for email updates to have encouraging nuggets sent straight to your inbox. Subscribe to our free monthly magazine and like us on Facebook for daily inspiration and education regarding science and the Bible. The Great Flood. Was it real? Was it global? And what really happened? Let's look at how it could have buried the creatures in rock layers exactly like we find them today. We'll find out more on Wonders Without Number. Welcome to Wonders Without Number. We love to talk about science and the Bible, how everything fits together, and we've got another exciting topic today. We want to talk about rocks and the flood. But before we do that, let's take a look at this week's Heavens Declare. Why should you believe in creation and not evolution? I mean, scientifically speaking, haven't we proven that evolution is a fact? Well, evolution is a very broad term, but while most people think of slow changes in the animal world, the theories of evolution also require very specific geological activity and lots of time. So let's look at evolutionary chronology and its implications. Now, we spent a lot of time at David Rives Ministries focusing specifically on scientific evidences confirming the Great Deluge of Noah's day, because this catastrophic event is key to understanding much of the geological and paleontological world around us. Let me see if I can sum up why there's so much controversy concerning the age of the Earth. You see, because we see riverbeds eroding at slow rates today, and we see very few animals being preserved as fossils today, evolution interprets this observation from a uniformitarianist perspective. This is the idea that the present is the key to the past. In other words, they take current values of erosion and fossilization, and then they extrapolate back into the past at the same slow rate. This certainly would give the appearance of an Earth that is millions of years old. I mean, on the surface, that seems like a pretty fair scientific approach. However, these calculations are ignoring one extremely important historical event. You know which one I'm talking about. In fact, this event is recorded in hundreds of cultures around the world, and many of the flood legends have very similar themes. You see, but one account gives not just more detail, but detail that is typically found in history books. That's the one we find in Genesis 6 through 8. As opposed to fairy tales and legends, which are usually very generic, lacking in detail, the biblical account is full of specific detail. The exact dimensions of the ark, the age of Noah when he entered, the number of days it rained, the height of the waters, the time before the flood waters abated, the month, even the day of the month when the flood started. This is a real event being described, and it's a real event that seriously alters uniformitarian dating methods. We've seen that small-scale catastrophes like earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and floods can quickly create geologic formations that would have normally taken thousands, if not millions of years based on the slow erosion rates of today. But if those small-scale catastrophes can have such profound effect on the geologic record, then imagine the effects of the global deluge. So a scientist might take the historical record of the flood and make a series of scientific predictions. We would expect to find layer after layer of sediment, our water lane strata, stacked on top of each other. We would expect millions of animals to have drowned and been covered in the soft mud. We would expect many of those animals to have been preserved as the layers of mud were compressed under tremendous amounts of water. We might expect that some of the organic material buried in between layers would create organic coal and oil deposits. We would expect to see massive mountain ranges pushed up as the still pliable layers were shifting. We would expect to find indications of past volcanic activity throughout large areas. We would expect there to be a genetic bottleneck at the time of the flood. We would expect a wide variety of species to be culled to extinction or near extinction around the time of the flood. We might expect new sets of adapted species migrating to certain regions and thriving. We might expect an ice age perpetuated by weather patterns immediately following the flood. We would expect to find evidence of people groups with very primitive needs taking to caves for warmth in the years following the flood. We would expect a global human population consistent with extrapolations from the date of the flood. Should I go on? In fact, there are tons of predictions we can make based on the biblical account of the flood. And what we would expect is exactly what we find. The flood upends the entire evolutionary doctrine of eons and long ages because it would have caused the very effects on the natural world that we see when we use the sciences to observe nature. What I'm saying is that modern science is pointing to the validity of the global flood. Just one more scientific reason that you shouldn't believe in molecules to man evolution. It takes a lot of faith. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Now let's meet my guest. Dr. Tim Clarey has a PhD in geology from Western Michigan University. He worked as an exploration geologist at Chevron, developing oil drilling prospects, and he's published many papers on aspects of the Rocky Mountains. Now, Tim has authored multiple college laboratory books and several books on dinosaurs in the Bible, and he's a geologist with the Institute for Creation Research. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, David. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. It is good to have you here in studio to talk about some of these things. Now, first off, tell me just a little bit about Institute for Creation Research.
Well, the Institute is started in 1970 by Henry Morris. He's our founder, and it's been going on for almost 50 years now. We have 9 scientists on our full-time staff, and with all different disciplines, from myself in geology to biology to genetics, a specialty of biology, nuclear physics, physics. We pretty much cover it all. And we're all doing research trying to show that God's word is true and that science really does confirm the Bible.
Well, and it really does, and we really appreciate your work there. Now, when we talk about various issues, the flood is one of those key events. Now, the flood explains so much about what we see in the geological record, doesn't it? As a geologist, what do you see?
Well, we see a record of rapid burial. To make a fossil, you got to bury things very, very quickly. And we see evidence of water deposits again and again and again, stacked on top of each other like bricks.
Well, okay, so tell me about the geologic column, because this is used as sort of the poster child for a 4.5 billion year history of Earth, and yet it does seem that in many places around the globe, you do find similar creatures in different rock layers. How do you interpret that?
Well, in my research, I'm looking at multiple continents, and every continent is showing this type of a record. But many times they leave out these marine fossils on the end.
Okay.
So on the right-hand side, you see throughout, mixed out, even when they're burying dinosaurs, you're burying marine animals right there with them. There's 5 species of sharks, for example, in the same rock formation that you find T-Rexes.
Really?
So there's marine fossils, more marine fossils actually than dinosaur bones in the rocks throughout the world. And we see the same pattern. The lowest most rocks contain mostly marine fossils, shallow marine fossils. As you work your way up, you get more animal types that start showing up from land that were probably in the swampy areas. And then as you go a little higher, you get to the dinosaurs, which probably also were in lowlands. And you go higher, you get the uplands animals, uplands type terrain. where you see different types of trees, different plants as you work your way up, just like you see different animals as you go up. So a lot of it has to do with the topography or the relief of the world, and it's the same pattern on every continent.
So if it's the same pattern on every continent, then wouldn't that speak to some global event?
Exactly, and that's the evidence I'm finding in the rocks, from continent to continent, not just North America, not just South America, but you put together multiple continents, and I'm now on my 4th continent, and they're all showing the exact same pattern.
Wow.
Not only are the fossils the same, but the pattern of the rocks and the fossils are exactly the same. The coverage is the same. You see increasing coverage from earliest stages of the flood to the later stages. You see the same point where they peak. You see the maximum coverage level on all the continents at the same time. And then you see the evidence of more sediments offshore. As the water went down, you're going to push a lot of sediment offshore, all at the same time. So to me, the rocks cry out that you have a global flood. There's no other way to interpret it.
Okay, now break this down for us. What are we talking about when we say a global flood? If everyone's heard of the account of Noah's Ark, but most people have never thought about the implications. They've never thought about what that meant. If the earth was flooded, then what would we expect to find?
Well, you would expect to find lots of buried things, lots of buried animals, because God said he was going to judge the earth and destroy everything. Start over again with whatever animals, the pairs of animals on the ark, the people that got on the ark, and unfortunately only 8 people who believed Noah, believed God there was going to be a flood. But that's what he was starting over with. But the rest of what was left behind is exactly what we see. Thousands of feet of sediments, all laid down by water, all over the earth in the same general order. As the water went higher, covering the hills in each area, you see the same fossils everywhere. There truly is a global nature to the geologic column and to the rock record for the flood.
Okay, multiple times throughout the Bible, we read about truth. A lot of people believe now there is no absolute truth. It's whatever you want to be true is what the truth is. But the Bible speaks all over about the truth. Psalm 119, thy word is true from the beginning. John 17, thy word is truth. What about truth, and what about truth deniers?
Well, a lot of people deny what the Bible says. They try to twist the words of the Bible, or they try to reinterpret the Bible and say, well, these are just stories. You know, you don't supposed to take the first 11 chapters maybe as literal truth or literal history. But yet when you read through the text, it's written as history, just like the accounts of Joseph, the accounts of Abraham. There's no difference in the textual style from early Genesis to the end. And that's why the genealogies are in there. So all these so-and-so begat so-and-so, and so-and-so begat so-and-so, and the years in between are there for a reason, to show us that the earth is really not that old. What the accounts, if you add them up, ends up showing around 6,000 years.
6,000 years. Now, what I love is some of the research that you have been doing over the last several years, where you try to break down these strongholds of evolution by showing these mega sequences as flood depositions and how it reshaped the continents. Tell me about that.
Well, it's very compelling, I think, to me, to show that there was a real global flood, because we see the same patterns going on. The secular scientists have, we use all these names, Cambrian through Cretaceous and Tertiary or Cenozoic, whatever you want to call it, and all their millions of years of time, they believe there were floods.
Okay.
They believe there are 6 kind of major floods.
Wow. And
that's what's listed on the far right-hand side of there, numbered 1 through 6.
Okay.
And so those are kind of larger than, they include some of these different, time periods that they normally list, the Sauk, Tippecanoe, Kaskaskia, etc. Those are these major flood events that came in and flooded. So they see the evidence that there were floods.
Even secularists, you're saying, will admit that there was a lot of water deposition, that there were multiple floods that reshaped the world, but they say, well, multiple floods spread out over millions upon millions of years.
They throw the millions of years in there because they need that, so they can kind of have this fictional story of evolution.
Okay.
Animals changed, but yet the fossils don't show animals changing through time at all.
So what does the fossil record show?
The fossil record shows animals suddenly showing up in rocks. Below a certain level called the Cambrian, there's almost no fossils, just mostly maybe algae or something like that. But when you get to the Cambrian, there's an explosion of fossils, and it's still a mystery of the secular science. Why is there an explosion? And then the next layer above, you see different fossils. The next layer above, different fossils. But we continually see fossils showing up without ancestors. They stay the same for a while, then they disappear. And as you're flooding these different levels around the world,
you're burying
animals at different environmental elevations, different ecological niches, we call them.
Okay. You've studied these things. You look at data all the time. Well, how can we use that data to interpret what we see around us, and how does that fit in with the biblical record? Hi, I'm David Rives, host of Wonders Without Number. Like what you're seeing? You can find so much more on the Creation Superstore. You'll find over 1,000 books, DVDs, and other quality resources on origin science, creation, and Bible history. Whether you're looking for nature documentaries, educational books, homeschool resources, or children's videos, we've got it all, so be sure to head over and check it out. Use this special promo code to receive 10% off your first order.
Well, the data that we use as geologists is the rocks.
Okay.
And the fossils in those rocks, what we find in the rocks. But it's the rocks are our facts. They're our data points. And when you add up the rocks like I'm doing, I'm going around the globe, put in oil well data, put in seismic data that connects to oil wells, anywhere I can get a geologic column So I can get whatever, if you were to drill a well right here, all the way to the crust, I put those rocks in our database.
Okay.
And you get enough, I've got almost 2,000 points now on several continents. And when you put all those together, you see a compelling picture of how the flood progressed.
Let's look at these, the Sauk, the Tippecanoe, and the Cascade.
Okay.
Where do you see that in the flood?
Okay, now-
How long do you think it took?
I think those might have been within the first 40 days
Okay.
of the flood. The Bible talks about day 40, the ark starts to float.
Yes.
And so the first 40 days, it may be that we're just flooding shallow seas.
Okay.
And what we see in those three sequences is just marine fossils.
Huh.
There's almost no land animals, there's almost no coal evidence of land plants at all. It isn't until the next sequence that we see land animals and coal suddenly show up. So
Interesting.
that might be the first 40 days because the ark, the Bible tells us, started to float on day 40. So then we know you're flooding the land.
Okay. All right. Talk about tsunamis
Okay.
for a second and the catastrophic effects that we see during sudden things that happen here on Earth today.
Right. Today we see very sudden movements of faults. We see offsets of faults that are just tens of feet or maybe just a few, covering a few hundred miles. And we create tsunamis like we see that devastate things. But during the flood, these things would have been 8, 10 times bigger. You know,
Wow.
nothing that we can really even fathom, because you're going to have real rapid movement at a very short time scale. Tremendous amounts of tsunamis, almost to the point where John Baumgartner has modeled these out in his computer models of the globes. You almost have continuous staining waves of water on the continents because you have so many tsunamis being generated by this rapid movement of the plates.
All right, now at this point, I'm going to turn this over to
Okay.
you, and I want you to take us through some of the core drill
Okay.
information
Okay.
that you have done. As an oil geologist, you have studied the data, and people drill wells all over the world.
All over the world.
So you have a lot of data points.
This is actually showing the very first, what I call the flood layer.
Okay.
There might have been some earlier flood rocks in a few selected locations, but this is the first extensive layer. And it's also the first layer that shows a lot of fossils. This is
Okay.
the Cambrian explosion. This is the bottom of the Sauk. And so you see this yellow is one continuous blanket sand.
Yes.
And blanket sands are a mystery today to the psycho to explain. How do you get a sand that covers that much area? One layer. Even if they try to say it took millions of years of a river, but you wouldn't, in many places it's only 10 foot thick or 20 foot thick.
Okay.
Others it's maybe 100 or more, but it's very, very thin. It's almost like it was laid down like a blanket. And we see as creationists, as flood believing scientists, we see that this is evidence of these tsunami waves coming in, going across a broad, flat area of the continent. Most of North America was pretty flat. And so it spread this big layer across, and on top of that was shale and limestone, but this is the bottommost layer.
So this was one of the first things to be buried right at the start of the
One
flood.
of the very first deposits, right, that buried
Okay.
animals. But again, this is compelling because it's so massive. It covers
Yes.
such a large area. This is not a trivial thing. And again, the secular scientists can explain these types of features. If we go up in the rocks, we can actually see these, from Michigan all the way down to Grand Canyon. It's the same rock layer across that
Wow.
whole area, all the way up to Alaska and across into Greenland.
Okay.
And it goes on to multiple continents, in fact, but we'll stick with North America. If we jump up a couple layers, this is blue, represents a limestone. So this is the
limestone.
red wall limestone down in Grand Canyon down here
Yeah.
in Arizona, but it extends all the way to Michigan as well. It extends all the way up to Canada through Montana, all the way up to Alaska.
Wow.
There's a little bit of sand in there in yellow, but that's one, again, blanket limestone layer that
Okay.
covers this huge area. How do you explain these massive layers of the same lithology, the same rock type, that far? Even if you believe in the millions of years, things are going to change.
Yes.
You wouldn't get the same layers. You wouldn't get the same layer of sand, the same layer of limestone. And on top of this, again, we get more and more and more rocks. And so what we see in those early sequences, the Sauk, Tippecanoe, Kaskaskia we talked about earlier, is all marine things. And so I believe that much of North America was a shallow sea.
Okay.
But if you go to Africa, you go to South America, you see almost no coverage at all in these first three sequences.
Okay.
Those areas might have been a little higher ground.
Oh.
And
I
so they
got
weren't
you.
flooded yet
And
until
so
later
the
in the flood.
First things flooded would
were-
expect it to be
would be
the
shallow
sea, the
seas, right.
pre-flood sea areas with marine creatures.
Yeah, and a lot of those areas might have only been 200 feet of water. A
Okay.
lot of it was on the continents,
Okay.
but it might have been a very shallow, really beautiful sea with lots of corals and all these things that we see.
Yeah.
And it might have been a beautiful sight to see, but those areas were flooded. There's almost no land animals at this point. And this might have been the first 40 days.
Okay.
And the flood starts to flood, and we see all these marine critters as you go along.
Yeah.
And you look at the total thickness in North America, it's really thick in the east where you see the green. It's over 3 kilometers thick, which is about 2 miles to most people that don't know metric. And over here, again, it's the same way, but down the middle of the country, it's very thin. Those darker colors mean you're probably just a few tens of feet or not existing at all. So there's no flooding over parts of the world at this point in the flood.
Because these may have been
dry
slightly
land,
dry.
a little drier land, a little higher elevation, we weren't flooding them.
Yeah, okay.
But then the Bible talks about day 40 to day 150, the waters went higher and higher and higher. And eventually reached the highest point, we believe, on day 150, and you can read in the text, the waters increased, the waters prevailed, they increased greatly, prevailed exceedingly. So if you read through that straightforward, you see God's telling us the water got higher, and then it went higher, then it went higher yet. And that's exactly what the rocks show. As you go to the Absarica, you start to see coal seams. You start to see the waves get bigger, and you see a whole new ocean crust starts to form. This is when catastrophic plate tectonics really took off. And you have massive subduction all over the earth, all over the Pacific Ocean, forming massive amounts of ocean crust. And as you make ocean crust, it's hot. Like a hot air balloon, it pushes up. So as you push up more new ocean crust, it's going to push more water onto the land. So those tsunami waves are going to start going higher. And sure enough, we now see coal seams, and we see sedimentation coming in from the west because of that subduction over 3 kilometers thick in the American West, which before, some of that was still high and dry. So now we start to see animals that lived on land start to get flooded. But they're still mixing in with marine animals. We see the first major coal seams showing up, mostly these lycopod coals. Swamp areas along the coasts.
Like a swampy area.
And we see these coal seams, as I mentioned. We see flooding taking place. And as you go higher, this, I believe, is the high point of the flood. Every continent shows this same high point. North America, South America, Africa, even Europe seems to show the same high point. But now you see more sediment coming from the west. And you see a couple little remnants up there in Canada, in Hudson Bay. Those little blue dots. Those little blue dots, to me, are very, very important because they're showing that there was sediment that was continuous across that. But what does the Bible tell us, David? The high point of the water went 15 cubits.
Upwards did it prevail.
Upwards of 15 cubits. So if that was the highest point in what's now Canada, you only went 15 cubits, you don't have a lot of room to leave a lot of sediment. So you're only going to leave maybe 5, 10 feet of sediment, and in some cases maybe a little bit more. And so after the flood, it's been now 4,500 years since the flood, you're going to erode those few 5, 2, 3 feet away. And so you're going to have barren crystalline rock there, and that's what we see today. That's one of the reasons why the secular scientists think it didn't flood everything, because they see areas of crystalline rock. But yet they forget there's remnants of that flooding that took place. So that shows me that the water went over the top, but it just didn't leave a lot behind. And the Bible explains exactly why. So as you go higher, though, you start mixing marine and land, marine and land, marine and land. As you go along, you see the dinosaurs mixed with sharks, like I mentioned, dinosaurs and T-Rexes with sharks. All these marine critters and clams, marine clams mixed with dinosaurs. Always mixing things, pushing these marine animals all the way into Kansas. You've dug dinosaurs and animals in Kansas. You see a lot of marine animals there as well.
You do. You see things like tylosaurs and giant 60-foot long. Yeah, absolutely.
And as only the Bible does tell us, the water went down. Starting on day 150, it started to go down, I think, to about day 314, but yet they didn't get off the ark yet. Because they had to wait for things to grow. There's nothing for the animals to eat, so they just stay on the ark, even though the water had receded. So that's why I don't go the full year here. I go to 314. But it talks in the text again, it says the waters assuaged in the King James. That means it kind of went back and forth, and that's what we see with tsunami waves. So it even kind of describes the tsunami activity as it's going down. And what happened is the bottom of the ocean started to cool. As things cool, they sink. So the crust of the ocean, as it was being produced, was hot, pushed up, flooded the land. As the ocean started to cool now, when you stop the plate motion, things start to cool and slow down. It pulls the water off. And God also says He made a wind to pass over the earth to push the water off as well. And so tremendous amounts of water and sediment and mud were stripped off the continents and pushed into the offshore areas, including our own Gulf of Mexico. So the waters returned from off the earth continually at the end of 150 days. So the high point, again, he reminds us, was 150 days into the flood, and then the water took a long time to go down. Floods today take a long time to go down.
That's true.
They don't just go away. And this is that story of the ocean crust sinking and pulling it down. So all that new ocean crust, especially the blue and green areas, the earlier forming crust, was starting to sink. And that's where we see the deepest oceans even today.
Okay.
So here's the Tejas, which is the draining water. We see all that thick area in the Gulf.
So
all
this
that
was
green
after the high point. This
after
is
the
the
high
draining
point.
water.
You're coming down, and everything's going offshore. So you see all the areas.
Oh, yeah.
There's less on the continent, but the mountains also pop up at this point. So the Rockies come up and they shed a lot of sediment.
Yep.
Tremendous amounts of sediment that were over the tops of the Rockies all got stripped off and put out in the Great Plains, and much of that ended up in the Gulf.
Okay.
And that's where we find tens of thousands of feet of Tejas or Cenozoic sediments. And we find a lot of our oil wells are drilled into those sediments today.
Okay.
And the deepest part out there is it's got a sand. There's a big sand called the Whopper Sand, which I've done some research on. That was discovered in 2005 in over 7,000 feet of water, 200 miles offshore.
Wow.
There's a 1,000-foot thick sand that covers the central part of the Gulf,
Okay.
which nobody predicted, but yet that seems to fit in really well with the initial draining of the floodwaters as it went off into the Gulf. So much material went off under high energy, just like water pouring off a parking lot. The highest energy is going to go out there first and push that sand way out in the Gulf, and then later it became more and more clay because less energy.
All right, so if we were to look at the sequences once more, what do we see? What's the very latest? What's the last?
The last one was the Tejas, which I
Okay.
think flew through kind of fast. That's
Yeah.
that's the Cenozoic, whatever you want to call it. You know, there's a bunch of different names in geology.
And that's where we find mammals.
That's where we find most of the mammals. We find mammals earlier, but we find the big mammals in the Cenozoic.
Okay.
And I think that's because they were living at the highest elevation.
Yeah.
And that's probably where most of the humans were living in the pre-flood world as well. Early on, you would see, you know, the earliest part of the flood didn't really flood the land because we don't see land animals. We don't see coal.
Okay.
We just see marine animals. And so it appears that the earlier part of the flood, maybe there wasn't enough seafloor made yet through the runaway subduction or the catastrophic plate tectonics activity. So you weren't pushing the waves high enough to flood the land.
Okay.
But you're burying a lot of marine
A
critters.
lot of marine critters.
A lot of tsunami waves. And as you made more seafloor, you push the water up higher, so it goes up and starts to flood
Okay.
what I call, in North America anyway, there's a little peninsula of land I call Dinosaur Peninsula.
Yeah.
But that would be the lowland areas. So
Okay.
you start to get the first coal seams, the first land animals mixed in with marine animals. And then as the water went higher yet, you get to the Zuni, you went over the top and you left
Okay.
those little remnants behind. But that's when you strip off everything right down to the crust.
Wow.
And all the mammals then got buried on top of the dinosaurs as the water kind of changed direction.
Okay.
And then everything shifted to go down, and you have what's left is this perfect record of the flood on every continent. Start with the marine animals, you know, to the lowlands areas, to the upland areas. And the flood explains it perfectly, in the perfect order that we see, without any transitional fossils whatsoever, because there weren't any.
Wow. That is so encouraging. Thank you, Dr. Clarey, for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, in such a brief time today, we've been able to go through some of the geological record and show how it is a record of the deposition of sediments during the time of the flood. We've seen that it would have successively trapped millions of creatures in these layers, preserving some of them in stone. Now, the Bible is true when it gives us the account of the Great Flood, but it's also true when it gives us the gospel. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. We hope that you've been encouraged and educated today, and we want to give you the tools that you need to boldly go forward and share what you've learned. Leave us questions and comments on our Facebook page, and maybe we'll be able to address them on a future episode. I'm David Rives. Until next time, I want you to keep looking up. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Hello, I'm David Rives, host of the TV show Creation in the 21st Century on TBN and the Heavens Declare video series. Each week we talk about breaking discoveries in science which reveal that our Creator, the God of the Bible, has left a pattern of His fingerprints throughout the universe. Engage with other like-minded believers through the Creation Club. This website offers thousands of articles written by scores of authors in multiple languages. Sign up to get our free monthly magazine delivered to your door. Want more? Genesis Science Network is our free 24/7 TV network, reaching millions of people around the world on internet, Roku, Fire TV, and mobile devices. Shop over 1,000 books and videos on the Creation Superstore, the world's largest Origins-related store. Visit our Wonders of Creation Center and sign up for email updates to have encouraging articles sent straight to your inbox. Like us on Facebook for daily inspiration and education regarding science and the Bible.